Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My special guest today is beloved entertainer Sam Harris.
Hi.
Sam, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. This means a lot to me.
And you've got a wonderful book out, Ham Slices of Life. Why
Yes.
that title?
Isn't it obvious?
Well.
I am a ham. That's me on the cover.
Yeah, okay.
Show them the cover.
Yeah.
That's me on the cover. I'm the ham.
Yeah.
I'm the ham.
Okay.
I've always been a ham.
It's not a very good likeness, though.
You don't think so?
No.
I've always been a ham. I've always, I've had the blessing of knowing what I loved and knowing what I love to do and just sort of putting it out there. And as you know, the book it's a collection of essays and stories and sort of self-deprecating looks back on my life as a child growing up in Oklahoma and my show business career and my role as a dad and a husband. And it's not chronological, as you know, but it's just these essays and stories from different moments that somehow then did create an odd sort of arc by the end.
What called you to write this book?
I had always loved writing, and I'd written for the stage and for television, and so many of my shows my concerts have a lot of comic monologue and satire kind of things, and a few essays. But the idea of a book sounded really enormous. But my friend Frank Langella, the great actor, who had read some things of mine and said, you just need to be writing. You need to be writing at this point in your life and really doing this, taking this more seriously. But he said, don't write with expectation. Don't write with the result of what's going to sell or what's going to do. And you know, Teresa, in my business, and this is another form of show business, it's always about selling and pitching and doing.
Right.
And he said, just write. And I started to just write. And I would send him stories, and he would say, this was great, go deeper on this. And I wrote them out of order as well. And I love the process. I love the craft of it. I love the magnifying glass of it. I love punctuation. I love rhythm. Writing is like music, too. It's a rhythm of it. It's a voice of it. And before long, I'm a really fast writer, but I will tweak until you pry my fingers from the page. And after a few months, I had a stack of pages, 50, 80 pages, and I started showing it to a few friends who were giving me great response, and all of a sudden I was flying to New York to be with book agents, and then suddenly in September, so I started in April, and in September sold it to Simon & Schuster, and they've been amazing. It was a really short process, and then there's all the tweaking and rewriting.
What were you hoping personally to gain from the book? Beyond fame, money, all these things which you already have. What did you want? What did Sam Harris hope to discover about himself, about his family, about his friends from this book?
I think I'm at a time in my life, at an age in my life, at a time in my career, and in my spiritual life. I've never been somebody that, I've always sort of put out my own stuff. My other half, Danny, always says, if I want to know what's really going on, I'll come to see one of your shows. I'm much more protective of people in my life in the book than I am of myself. I kind of put it out there. But I felt that not only do I love the process and craft of writing, but I felt like it was a time in which I could say these stories, which are mostly humorous, but I do go to some darker places.
You do.
And expose some things because, not that I think it's important. That's why, by the way, it's not in order. I wouldn't read an autobiography about Sam Harris. I don't care. Who cares? But, and this is not a one-off. I intend to keep doing this. I just felt like it was in a time in my life when I could really look at things and say things and put them out there in a way that could be cathartic for me, that would be funny and entertaining and helpful for others, you know?
Yes,
Not because I think I'm a teacher or something, but I think our job as artists is to reflect a sense of our own humanity, and therefore we relate to other people.
You're very candid in the book. You name friends, you name family. Was that tricky for you? Was that tricky for them?
It was scary. I name friends that I grew up with, my family, my parents, my father. There's a lot of things in there about my father and my relationship with him. And you know, I grew up in a generation in which, first of all, people had children very, very young, and sometimes still do, but
Yes.
you know, they were kids themselves. And it was a generation where fathers were out doing their thing and finding themselves and finding their identity, and mothers were for raising children. And so it was a sense of absence a lot, and me sort of finding my own voice. And also I realized when I was a kid that I was a little different. Later I realized that that also meant gay. But at the time, it was knowing I was different before it had a name that specified shame even, you know. As far as other friends I mentioned and celebrity friends, the stories in which celebrities are mentioned are really more about me. I don't tell any dirt on
Right.
anybody. You know,
Right.
it's
No,
not a
you don't.
mean-spirited book. It's about sort of my quest to find my place and me figure it out. There's a sort of story in there about doing a thing with Aretha Franklin, which is a horrible, horrible experience.
Yeah, opening for her during a blizzard.
It
I
was
mean, yeah.
terrible, and it was late and lazy, and just lied to me, and put me in a position of not, but where I had to really pull from my stuff, you know, to pull this off. And it's a funny, funny story, but it's harrowing. Even when I was writing and reading, I'm like, I can't believe this happened. But again, that story is more about me than Aretha.
And the Liza stories, visiting her in rehab during Family Week.
Yes, Liza and I had a very, you know, long, close friendship at that point, and she had asked me to come visit her at Family Week in rehab. But again, that story is about my backdoor into acknowledging my own alcoholism. And the night before I went to the facility in rehab, being in a hotel, flying across the country, saying yes, of course, because my friend had a problem and I needed to be there for her. And meanwhile, I was an alcoholic, an unacknowledged alcoholic. And my last night of drinking was in a hotel room in which the room service closed and I couldn't get any more alcohol because I kept having to bring. Because I was just going to have a little because I wanted to be
I know.
fresh. But you know,
I know.
us alcoholics don't do that well.
No.
So they closed and they wouldn't, and I said, I'll pay you double. I'll come get it myself. What are you talking about? It's 10 o'clock. No, we're closed. So I found myself in boxer shorts and a tank top t-shirt, creeping down the fire stairwell, scampering across the lobby, breaking into the window of the restaurant and going into the kitchen to find alcohol. And I didn't look at this as unusual behavior.
Well,
And then I go into this facility for Family Week in which we're doing all of these 12-step processes and exercises and things. And Liza's doing great and getting better and better. And I am detoxing and shaking and scratching myself to a bloody pulp and can't function. And at the end of that week, recognized that I had a problem. And then when I finally acknowledged that and said, and the dam broke, and said, I'm an alcoholic. And Liza said, I know, baby. I know. It was like a gift, you know.
the good news, 9 years sober.
10.
10 years
10
sober.
years.
That's great. You know, Sam, there may be people in the audience who are watching us as this show airs who are struggling with addiction. What special message would you have for them?
You are not alone. You know, I think our worst fear in any situation, whatever it is, whether it's loss, whether it's grief, whether it's feeling outside, is that you are not alone. Is the feeling that we're the only ones going through this, that we're the only ones to have trod this path, and it's just not true. And that's the brilliant thing about my experience with 12-step programs, is that someone has walked that path before you. And it's the acknowledgement of saying, I have a problem, that allows you to surrender. So many of us who are addicts are trying to manage, and do so quite successfully. Philip Seymour Hoffman, just,
Oh, yeah.
what a tragedy. 46 years old, 3 children. And part of me, my heart breaks, and yet I get so mad because of these kids and the selfishness of the disease. But the truth is surrender, of saying, I cannot manage this, and then taking direction. And when I was at that place, my life had become so small and so isolated and so sad. It's such a simple word, isn't it, sad? But it's so everything. That if somebody had told me to, shave my head and sing Dixie on one leg, I would have done it. And that's how I got sober, and that's how I remain sober. So that's my answer. For anyone who's struggling with anything, reach out, because people are there to guide you. You have to just let them.
That's nicely said. Earlier you were talking about some of your struggles growing up, and I'd ask you to read the opening passage to your book, Unwrapped.
Sure. Unwrapped. When I was 19 years old, while helping my Aunt Betty reorganize her kitchen cabinets, I discovered a beaten and worn plastic Mary Poppins cup and saucer marooned in the back corner of an ignored shelf. They were issued in 1964, the year of the movie's release. My aunt told me that they'd been intended for me when I was little, but my father had returned them to her because I was, quote, too obsessed with Mary Poppins and singing and dancing. In the next room, my dad, uncle, brother, and all 4 of my boy cousins could be heard yelling in that guttural, grunting, Cro-Magnon caterwauling exclusively reserved for watching football games on television and killing wild pigs on a hunt. I marched into the living room and presented the cup and saucer with outstretched arms. "Do you remember these?" I said, my confrontational passion unbefitting some battered old plastic children's dishes. They all stared at me, confused, as if I'd just asked for an honest opinion about the chances of a fashion comeback for the ascot. "No, son," my father said. "Ask your mother." The Cowboys scored another touchdown, and the room erupted as they hug-slapped and adjusted their crotches. My father loved the Cowboys and could recount the great plays of the last 20 years, but he had no memory of the banning of the Mary Poppins treasures. Cue home movie, Christmas, 1964. I am 3 years old. My mother is operating the camera. It is in grainy, Super 8 color, and there is no sound. A toy army tank and various toy guns are strewn about, and a mini rifle is propped against the wall. Plastic grenades litter the floor. G.I. Joe lies in a coffin-like cellophane-covered box. It is a battlefield of unwrapped but unattended boy toys around the base of our silver aluminum Christmas tree, which is bobbed with shiny red and green Woolworth balls, reflecting the muted shades of an electric color wheel. Remember those? I open a new wool coat, charcoal with a spattering of white, knee-length with large lapels and giant black buttons. Now this is a present. I eagerly put it on and model it full tilt. I am overtaken with euphoria and begin to dance. The camera pans to capture the delight of each of my 3 grandparents until it lands on my father, whose young, handsome face steams with displeasure and perhaps a touch of anger. His posture reflects a just-released sigh of defeat. The camera pans back to me, still dancing. I look to my father and take in his reaction. For a split second, I lose my timing. Then I take a big breath, turn back to the camera, smile, and just dance harder.
And you've been dancing harder ever since.
I've been dancing harder ever since. We've all come a long way.
We have, and your dad most especially.
Oh my God, my dad is the greatest dad. He's the greatest dad, and he's the greatest grandfather to my 5-year-old. And he's the greatest father-in-law to my husband, who embraces him as a son. And, I think that it was hard because in that time, in that culture, in this place, there were no role models. There was no one. There was no one. There was not an actor, a singer, a politician, a writer, nothing. And I think my father was so terrified for his little odd son because he didn't want his son's life to be hard and lonely. He saw how misfits were treated. And so while he was so encouraging, both my parents, of my passion and my expression and my love of music and theater, there was always this sort of dichotomy of this trepidation of, but what does this mean? He was afraid, and now he's this sentimental, sweet, loving, hugely emotionally accessible man. And he wasn't then, and now he is. It's a marked change, not only in him and our evolvement, but I think in the culture as well. You know, I mean, they just named a street after me in my little town in Sand Springs. I get teary thinking about it because it's really less of a reflection, I think, of me than it is of how far we've all come, you know?
And you seem to remember Sand Springs so fondly. In your acknowledgments, you say that they didn't always understand you in Sand Springs, but they embraced you nonetheless.
They did. They did embrace me and they encouraged me. They recognized my talent. And certainly my parents did. You know, I left home when I was 15 years old, which I look at 15 years old and think, oh my God, who was parent? But they trusted me and they knew I needed to go. And Sand Springs as a community, I think that's what was also a conundrum for me, was I was getting this support and applause. And I was sort of the star of the town.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was still called queer and faggot
Yeah.
across the schoolyard, you know?
Yeah.
So I had to come into my own, find my own way.
Have you been able to talk about things in the book that you haven't been able to visit with, like with your parents one-on-one, like at Thanksgiving and Christmas and different times?
I think so. I was able to explore things like, even though the book is mostly humorous essays, right?
Yeah.
It's funny,
Oh, yeah.
it's got the voice of comedy, it's a comic book, but it does go to darker places, and there is a chapter in there about my attempted teen suicide. I had never really discussed that with my parents. They knew about it, but not certainly to the depth and description of this. And I think there is a sort of horror that a parent realizes I didn't really know. I didn't really know that my child, and what could be more terrifying for a parent than to know their child was in that kind of pain. So I think that was hard for them in a way, you know, things like that.
I can imagine exactly what you're saying. And, you know, I think, though we do want to emphasize that it's a funny book.
It's a funny book.
You're being compared
With the
to...
occasional suicide attempt.
well, yes, but you're being compared to David Sedaris, for goodness sakes.
Oh, it's such an honor. I'm such a big fan of his.
Well, some people are saying you're even better than Sedaris. I mean,
Well, we're different voices. I think, you know, he's so funny and he's so crafted. And I think my voice is different. I hope that I'm funny. But, you know, I don't know. I have a different voice. I'm a different person. And there's a different sense of heart in it. Although I think he writes with great heart. We're different people.
We've been talking about the past, and we're showing a couple of pictures. One of you from Gypsy. They give us the backstory of this.
Oh, boy. Well, in Gypsy, I played a newsboy when I was 10 years old. And the newsboys in Baby June and Little Louise don't work in the second act at all. And it was, you know, the show is about a stripper. It's about stripping. And here we were. We thought we were veterans of the stage. We had nothing to do in the second act. And so in the second act, because we had to stay for the curtain call, we would climb the stairs. This was at Tulsa Little Theater, up to the costume room, which was on the second floor. And there we were surrounded by these racks of all these costumes. And we would put on layers of Dickensian sack jackets and World War I khaki breeches and the crown of thorns from the Easter pageant and gloves and hats, and then we would play strip poker.
Okay,
and we were like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, and we would play strip poker, and we would, you know, have stolen a couple of cigarettes from the actors' stations and have a little nip from Baby June's parents' liquor cabinet, and we played strip poker up there. And, you know, and it was where I sort of found my first, I was playing with real adults and other kids who had my same passion. And it was sort of where I found my first sense of tribe. And I remember, because the church thing, you know, I grew up in the Bible Belt, but I grew up in a church also that had it was about God-fearing and was told that communists and homosexuals would burn in hell. We were in the same category.
Yeah, wow.
And so I had to find a different God, more huggy than punishy. And I had to redefine something for myself, and I had to find a different church, and that was the Church of Expression and theater. And I found it with these people and with these kids. And in the book, we're taking off our stuff, and I trade my crown of thorns for my newsboy apple cap and run down from my bow.
Yeah, it was just a beginning. We're showing another photo of you from Dark at the Top of the Stairs.
you know, which the character I played was a 10-year-old sissy boy who found his respite in his movie star scrapbooks of the stars and was beaten up regularly by the bullies. Typecasting? I don't know. My mom, you know, also was so supportive.
Oh, yes, we don't want to forget her because she adores you and is so proud.
She's the best. She's the best. And, but she, you know, she was into these plays, and she was, I think, maybe a frustrated actress is the wrong word, but loved the stage and had been in drama in her life. So when I would do a play, we would, you know, to cue me and to prepare me, we would read through, and she would read all the other characters, even if I wasn't in the scene, because she wanted to read all the parts. You know, we grew up in a house that nurtured theater and music, and my father was a band director, so I got to be in all the high school plays when I was 5 years old. You know, I was in South Pacific playing one of the mixed-race Polynesian bastard children. And wanted to play, the next show they did when I was 5 was The Miracle Worker, and I became fixated with Helen Keller. I related to all of her, you know, obstacles and all of her, because she had the human spirit, and I related to her. And again, I was relating to this outside person. And so because I was, had been in South Pacific, I was certain that I would land the role of Helen.
Which would have been so innovative.
Wouldn't it?
You were
and I
ahead
asked
of your
to read.
time.
They had a part for me, and I said, I want to read. And I went, I convinced them, and I said, they said, we have a part for you. And I said, but I want to read for Helen. You know, Helen doesn't have any lines, Teresa.
No, I know. I didn't want to say anything.
But I was prepared to stagger with my eyes slightly crossed and bump into furniture. Didn't get the part.
You've since gone on to play so many great roles. If you could point to one role that's closest to your heart, which one would it be?
Wow, closest to my heart was actually a show, a musical, that we never got to Broadway. Toi Toi, we still will. It had numerous titles, but I think the last one was The Broadway Man, which was about Al Jolson.
Yeah.
And it's near and dear to my heart, a beautifully, beautifully written, crafted piece, a musical that had original music and some of his songs. And it really captures not only that time in history, but this man's desperate need for applause and the stage and approval beyond everything. I am someone who I believe has found the balance. My child is the number one thing in my life. My home life is number one. What I do is what I do. It's part of who I am, but it's not who I am. It's what I do. And Al Jolson never got there. This desperation, and then the fact that he didn't really change with the times. As culture changed, as people evolved, he was still doing this thing, which he was the biggest star in the world. Unlike, it was like a Michael Jackson of his time. So exploring that darkness and that fear and that desperate need is so fascinating to me as an actor. Plus, I get to go out there and sing these songs, you know. He's a ham.
A ham. Well, I've got to ask you about Joseph.
Oh, Joseph. Joseph, I did the Broadway national tour for about 1.5 years. That show to me, you know, was more about doing push-ups and sit-ups than singing, because it's one of those great roles where everybody's always talking about you, and then you get to come on and sing a great song, and then they do all the work. But the hardest part of that show was I was practically naked the whole time. So I was, you know, always doing work. Everything was, where's the gym, the sit-ups and the push-ups, and being on the road for so long with that show. And then I was, you know, I was still drinking at that time. So my caloric intake became my primary means, was alcohol. And then I eventually started painting on abs with eyeshadow. But I loved doing the tour, and it was where I met my partner. And it was a great experience.
You also write in the book about a call you got from Oprah.
Yeah. We had moved from New York to Los Angeles on September 10th, 2001, the day before. And it, of course, 9/11 happened to everyone, but it happened more to New Yorkers. And I was a New Yorker. I had lived there for many years and moved from it was like abandoning your burning house. And I know that if it had happened before we moved, it would have changed our plans. And I felt so lost and so without community and so guilty And then a few days later, I got a call from Oprah Winfrey, and I'd done her show before, asking me to come to do a show called Music to Heal Our Hearts. And it gave me a sense of action and purpose, of healing. Didn't know what I was going to do or sing, and we got on a plane, and everything had changed. You know, Harpo was like a municipality. It was like so the most perfectly run, but this was everything was changed. You know, she was in sweatpants and a ball cap. We were sitting around a piano trying to figure out what to do. We had dinner at her house, and I sang Precious Lord, which she had suggested, which was Dr. King's favorite hymn, and You'll Never Walk Alone. And she was determined to make this show not a funeral, but a declaration of triumph and survival. And it was hard. I barely made it through it. And, you know, singing this song live, tears in my eyes, and singing about we will make it through. And with me and all these gospel greats, once again, I was the token white boy. And then when the show's over, we'd all gotten through it, and she said, I'm flying back west too. Do you want to come with me? And I said, oh, you know, your staff already has a ticket for me. But she said, no, I'm with me. Do you want to come with me? I'm like, oh, yeah, you mean on your plane? Yes, of course. Yeah. So Todd, my brilliant music director, and I went with her on her plane and a few others. And we had comfort food at her house the night before at her apartment, which was fried green tomatoes and pork chops and gravy. And she brought the leftovers in Tupperware. And we're on the plane, and she said, let's watch the show. And Andre Walker, her dresser, said, she never watches the show when the show's done. And we sat on this couch, sort of draped around each other, eating comfort food like a family in their den on movie night. And we watched this show we had just done. And after it was over, she said, let's watch it again. And we did. And it was the most healing. You know, when we're lost, the best thing we can do is do something for someone else. That's what it felt like.
And I feel that's partly what you've done with this book.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being with us today,
Thank you.
Sam.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.